All right, so we're going to be working with the formula for the equation of a circle. And when you look at this equation, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, that gives you the center of the circle, which is kind of like what we've been doing in the past where we have found like the vertex. So we're going to do the opposite of this, which is h. And then for the first time, our y coordinate is going to be the opposite as well. And the reason for that is because it's in parentheses, just like the x has always been. So for this time, when we're doing circles, we're actually going to have opposite of both of those. So opposite of negative, positive h, opposite of negative, positive k. And then the radius of the circle is the square root of the number on the end. So the radius of the circle is going to be r. So when we look at example 1, the center and the radius for this circle, the center would be positive 3, negative 7. And the radius of the circle would be the square root of 15. All right, example 2 is a little bit more difficult because they gave you the equation of a circle, but they did not put it in, this is called the standard form. So here, this is the general conic form of a circle, which you learn more about in pre-calc, but this is the standard form. So what we want to do is we want to convert this into the standard form because then we can find the center and the radius so we can work with the circle. So what we have to do first is we have to complete the square because this is something squared and something squared. And so if you guys recall from completing the square, we want to take this number, the plain number, and we want to move it over. So if you are a little bit rusty on completing the square and would like to look back at some old notes, it would be in the quadratics unit, or if you have a good cheat sheet for unit 2, you could go back and look at that. It was our quadratics unit. So I'm going to go ahead and put the x's together, x squared and negative 18x. And then y squared and positive 10y, so I'm grouping them by the variable. And then the number, I'm going to go ahead and have subtracted that over. All right, so what we do here, and we've never done this before, is we're actually going to complete the square 2 different times. We're going to do it once for the x, and we're going to do it once for the y. So I'm going to do negative 18 divided by 2 gives me negative 9. And then negative 9 squared is 81. And so the number that completes the square is 81. But I can't just add 81 to the left side. I have to add 81 to the right side as well of the equation. Okay, so now I'm going to say 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So the number that completed the square on this one is 25. But I can't just add 25 to the left side of the equation, I have to add it to the right side as well. Okay, so at this point I have something squared plus something squared equals a number over here. And the something squared would be x minus 9. If you guys recall, the number you got when you divided by 2 is the number that goes in the parentheses. So I have y minus 9. Over here, sorry, x minus 9. Over here, I have y plus 5. So x minus 9 squared, y plus 5 squared. For the rest of it, I just have to add those numbers together. So I get 9. Okay, so now that I have put it in that standard form, I can go ahead and figure out what the center is and what the radius is. So the center of the circle is 9, negative 5. The radius of the circle is the square root of 9, which is 3. Sorry, the lights went off. I didn't move enough. All right. Example 3 says to find the area and circumference of the circle from example 1. So before we do that, we have to remember what those formulas are. So the area of a circle is pi r squared. And the circumference of a circle is kind of like the perimeter, if you guys remember. It's like the length around a circle, and that's 2 pi r. So for the area of the circle in example 1, we're going to say area is pi times square root 15 squared. And so root 15 times root 15, The square roots are going to cancel, and we just get 15 pi. I guess I could have said squared and square root cancel. That might have made more sense. So 15 pi, they didn't tell us if it was inches or centimeters or whatever, so I'm going to go ahead and just say UN for units, 15 pi units squared. And then for the circumference, we have 2 times pi times the square root of 15. And here, I mean, we could, I guess it's going to look weird no matter what. I'd say 2 root 15 times pi, maybe? That seems weird. I'd maybe leave it like that, to be honest. It doesn't matter. All right. So area, circumference. Just want to make sure that we remember those formulas. Okay. So next, they want you to sketch the circle. And so to sketch the circle, we're going to start with the center. So the center for this circle, this one, since there are no parentheses, it's kind of like it had x plus 0 squared in the parentheses. That's why they didn't even write them. So the x-coordinate of the circle is 0. The y-coordinate of the circle is 1. So I'm going to go to 0, 1. And then from there, we know that the radius is 9. So I'm going to go up 9. I'm going to go right 9. I'm going to go left 9. I'm going to go down 9. So I'm doing like the radius and all the easy ways. I didn't go out 9 this way because it's harder to count diagonally. So, and then from there, I'm just going to be real careful to draw a reasonable looking circle. Hey, that's pretty good. All right, so there's my circle. Technically, we should always go back and erase the center because a circle is not defined by its center. It's only defined by the points that actually make up the circle. I'm not going to ever get mad if you don't erase it, but technically we should get rid of it. All right, again, this problem is obnoxious because it's harder to graph a circle when it's in that general form, not the standard form. So I'm going to go ahead and do that process for completing the square. So I'm going to put my x's together. I have x squared minus 12x, and I have y squared minus 4y. And then the number that did not have a variable attached to it, I'm going to go ahead and move to the other side, so negative 15. So negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36, and so that's the number that completes the square. And then for this one, negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4, so that's the number that completes the square for the y's. And you'll notice that each time I completed the square, I made sure to add the number to the right side of the equation. So the answer I got when I divided by 2, that's going to be important for when I write the equation next. So for the x, I'm going to say x minus 6 squared plus y minus 2 squared. And then to figure out what the number is on the end, negative 15 plus 36 plus 4 is 25. And so for this circle, we have a center of 6, 2, and then a radius of 5. Square root of 25 is 5. All right, so right 6 up 2. And then we're going to go to the right 5 and up 5, left 5, down 5. And then there's our circle. Okay. Example 6 says to find the area and circumference of the circle in example 4. So the area would be pi times 9 squared, which is 81 pi. And we'll just write units squared because they didn't tell us the units. the circumference would be 2 times pi times 9. This time, since we don't have a square root, it's a little bit nicer. 2 times 9 is 18, so 18 pi units. Since the circumference is a length, it just gets units, not units squared. All right, let's go ahead and work on the examples on the back. So this one says to write the equation of a circle. So I'm going to go ahead and start x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So they gave us a center, which is an h and a k, and then they gave us a point on the circle, which is an x and a y. Okay, so I have x minus 1 squared plus y plus 2 squared equals r squared. The only other thing I need for my equation technically is I need an r, but they didn't give me that. They only gave me an x and a y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that x and y, and I'm going to plug it in for the x, and I'm going to plug it in for the y. Okay, and you'll see why that works in a second. So if I plug in the x, I get -1 minus 1 squared plus 11 plus 2 squared equals r squared. So the reason that this was beneficial is because when I have all these numbers plugged in, I'll know what r squared equals. So let me go ahead and do that. -1 minus 1 squared plus 11 plus 2 squared is 173. So I have 173 equals r squared. And so now I can go ahead and take this and I can plug it in for my r squared. So recall, when you do the formula for the area of a circle, you don't actually need to know what the radius is. You need the radius squared. So I don't need to square root this. I'm really just going to use the 173. So the formula is x minus 1 squared plus y plus 2 squared equals 173. And that's it. I am finished. Okay. The endpoints of a diameter, if you guys recall what a diameter is, that's all the way across the circle, right? So a radius is half, a diameter is the whole thing. And so if the endpoints of the diameter is what they've given you, then they're telling you that they've given you all the way across the circle. So what we want to do is we want to find the center by finding the middle of these 2 points. And this is going to bring you back to middle school, I think, is the last time you guys have done the midpoint formula. But the midpoint formula says if you want to find the middle of 2 x's, you just add them together and divide by 2, which I think is kind of common sense. It makes sense, like when you find the average of something, you add them and divide by 2. So that's what the midpoint formula is really doing. So we're going to find the middle of the x's and the middle of the y's. And even though we're using the midpoint formula to do that, when we do that with the endpoints of the diameter, it's going to give us the center of the circle. All right, so let me make this a better drawing, actually. So the diameter is the whole thing. The center is just that center point. Okay, so for the center of the circle, I'm going to have 2 plus -10 over 2, and I'm going to have -17 plus 11 over 2. And so the center of the circle is -8 divided by 2 is -4. -6 divided by 2 is -3. Okay, so to start the equation, I have x minus 4, not minus plus, sorry, x plus 4 squared plus y plus 3 squared equals r squared. Again, I don't have the r, but what I do have this time is I have an x and a y and an x and a y. So this is very similar now to example number 7. So it doesn't matter which x and y you choose. All that matters is that you plug them in. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the first one. So 2 plus 4 squared plus -17 plus 3 squared equals 232. So I'm going to go ahead and write what I typed. Okay, and so that means that this 232 can go right over here. Okay. Next, they gave us the center, so we can go ahead and start our equation. X minus 6 squared plus y minus 8 squared equals r squared. So that was pretty easy. Next, they told us that the area is 25 pi. So if area is pi r squared, and the area of this problem is 25, that was supposed to be 5, 25 pi, then that means that r squared equals 25. And I don't even have to solve for r, because r squared is what is in the equation. So 25 is just going to go right there. And I can go ahead and erase this and put the 25. Okay, and then one last example. We have x plus 16 for our center, plus y minus 8 squared equals r squared. They gave us the circumference, so 2 pi r equals 14 pi. So I can get rid of the pi's. So I have 2r equals 14. That means that r is 7. And if r is 7, then r squared is 49. And so that is what is going to go in my equation. And we're all done. So as you guys can see, the equation itself is pretty easy to work with. So we are mostly going to focus on how can I write the equation from different pieces of information, especially with practicing completing the square, because I know that's going to be the hardest part.